Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. So with the Premier League 2018-19 season having kicked off at the weekend and crucially the English transfer window already having slammed shut just a few days beforehand, there is an interesting question being asked, I think a lot more than usual in the English media over the last few days, and it is the question over what exactly constitutes success for Liverpool this season, and even more crucially, whether or not Jurgen Klopp has to win a trophy for this to be a successful season, and for some, whether or not he has to win a trophy to even stay in a job at the club. And first of all, it's interesting to look at where this question has actually come from, because there are multiple ways of looking at it. First of all, you can argue that the question has come from the idea that Liverpool have splashed the cash this summer. Now, if you ask me, that's total nonsense. I mean, if you think that as well, you're kind of watching the wrong video, because I think you have to look at it. Yeah, you can look at it for just this summer, and even the net spend figures this summer show that Liverpool have spent potentially a little bit over the odds, but you only have to look back to January where Liverpool, we sold a lad for £142.5 million at the end of the day. We had a net spend of minus £75 million in that transfer window, to realise that this is not just money that Liverpool have earned rightfully through player sales and through TV revenue and stuff like that, but it's also money that Jurgen Klopp and his team have earned the right to spend, given how well they've performed in the transfer window in the past few years, the way they've been able to get players on bargain fees that have turned out to be absolute world-class talents for Liverpool. I think Klopp and Edwards and everyone involved in transfers have earned the right to have that money and to spend it on players as well. So I think there's no credibility to the idea that just because we spent a lot of money this summer means that we have to achieve some sort of success that we haven't had in the past. However, I think there are reasonable ideas about what we've done this summer that does show that there should be an expectation on Liverpool that is higher than what they have had in the past. You know, we have brought in quality players, and it's not necessarily to do with the money that's been spent on the players, but the quality of the players that have been brought in and the way they've been brought in to supposedly paper over cracks and fix problems that Liverpool have had in the past. These haven't been luxury signings. These are signings that are meant to improve us in the areas that we have been weakest over the last couple of years. And when you couple that with the fact that we did have an incredibly impressive second half of last season, you know, our league form picked up massively, our defensive problems all but went away after the signing of Virgil van Dijk, and we did, of course, get to the Champions League final. I think it's right to expect a lot of Liverpool this season, but crucially, should we be expecting a trophy? Now, I'm going to go through this argument by going through each of the competitions we're involved in individually, starting off with the Premier League, which is the holy grail for Liverpool fans. You know, if we were offered one trophy at the start of this season, I think, you know, there is a lot of romance to the European Cup, but it has been so long since we've won the league, and it does feel like we've had so many problems that have kept us away from doing so in the past. This is the one that most Liverpool fans would absolutely bite your hands off to have their hands on at the end of the season. And I think it's a fair one to expect that we will do very, very well in the domestic league this season. I think this is certainly, we are better positioned than we have possibly ever been in the Premier League era to win it. You know, I think we've got a starting 11 that performs so much more consistently than it has done in the past, and that has always been one of the problems Liverpool have had when it's come to trying to win the league, is that we've had fantastic teams, but rarely have we had a fantastic team that's performed at the same level for all 38 games. You know, when you look at past league title near misses, the closest one is potentially even the 16-17 season, Klopp's first full season, where it's easy to forget that in November we were top of the table and then Liverpool's form started to dip. They had an absolutely horrendous January and February period, and by the end of the season we were scrapping for fourth. Looking back a couple of years before that, you've got the 13-14 season. We were fantastic in the second half, but I'd argue that we were a little bit iffy in the first half, and that's potentially what cost us. And even when you look back at title challenges before that, there has sometimes been a problem where Liverpool have just had patches of the season where form just hasn't been that great. And I think we're in a position now where the players we've got, they're not just mercurial talents. You know, when you look at Van Dijk, when you look at, I think, Keita as well, and certainly all three members of the front three, Mane, Firmino and Salah, those are players who are capable of delivering their absolute maximum capacity of their talent on a regular basis. And even when they have bad games, they are good enough that they can still affect a match. They can still almost win a match on their own when they're not at their best. And that is something that will be crucial to Liverpool this season and will hopefully drive them towards a title challenge. And then the other problem that did really cause us issues in the 08-09 season when we came second, and in the 13-14 season as well, is strength in depth. So many times in those seasons, Liverpool did not have anyone on the bench to look to when the members of the starting 11 were tired and needed replacing, or quite simply quickly when the game needed changing, and that is not a situation Liverpool are in now. We even saw it at the weekend when we brought on Shaqiri and Sturridge. There was almost no drop-off in quality whatsoever, and it just meant we could bring on players who were sharper and fitter than those who were getting tired on the field, and also who offered something a little bit different. You know, Daniel Sturridge is a proven goal scorer who showed that at the weekend when he scored within 24 seconds of coming on. So I think there's plenty of arguments for why Liverpool have got a real shot at the Premier League title this season. You know, we've got a consistent, high-quality squad and a lot of strength in depth, and those are two things that are incredibly crucial to challenging for the league title. However, there is a big problem standing in our way, and it is, of course, the supposedly immovable object that is Manchester City. You know, at the end of the day, they are just phenomenal, and they almost have the upper hand over Liverpool in that they've won it already. They won it last season. They know what they're doing when it comes to trying to win the Premier League, and hopefully it'll be different this season. We'd hope that Liverpool would put more pressure on them than anyone did last season, and it will be interesting to see how City cope with that. But at the end of the day, they got 100 points last season, and from what we've seen so far, we've only seen a little bit, you know, the Community Shield match and the match against Arsenal at the weekend, but it doesn't really feel like there are any signs of them slowing down, you know, and it's going to be difficult for them, but it is entirely possible that they could get 100 points again. So, what should Liverpool be doing in the Premier League? Should we be expecting them to win the league, or should a title challenge be the expectation for this season? If you ask me, in any other year, I'd expect to win. In any other year, you know, if you time travelled back 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, I'd look at where Liverpool were and say, you know what, they should be winning the thing this season. But at the end of the day, with the position City are in, you just cannot account for how good they are going to be. You cannot predict how high they are going to be in terms of points at the end of the season. So, to be honest, a title challenge for me would be good enough. I've said it before, if we are mathematically in the equation come May, if we are still putting pressure on City in those final games, that's probably good enough. And I think inside the club as well, that's probably how it's being looked at. It's not looked at as this is the position we want to finish in. It's probably more a matter of a points total. So I'd say 90 points would represent an incredibly good return for Liverpool. You know, that in any other year, again, would win you the title. I'm pretty sure that would be our highest points total ever in the Premier League, certainly since the 38-game format was introduced. And so, you know, if City beat us and we've got 90 points, you can't really complain at the end of the day. So yeah, we want to win the league, but I think a title challenge where, not to sound a bit Spursy, but we put the pressure on throughout the season would represent success in the Premier League for Liverpool. So then the next trophy, the other big trophy, the other one that we all want to get our hands on, it is the Champions League. And this is, of course, a very interesting one because it is one that Liverpool came so close to winning last season. And that's crucial because that shows that it's something we're capable of winning. You know, Liverpool, as I said, have always fallen short in the past when it comes to Premier League title challenges. So there is always the question over whether we can overcome that this season or whether or not it will end up being same old Liverpool in that regard. But when it comes to European competition, we've got undeniable pedigree. You know, we've not just won it recently in Istanbul and all that, and you know, you can argue that that's getting involved in history and stuff like that, but it is interwoven into the fabric of the club almost. But last season as well, we proved that we've got the capability to take on all comers in Europe and get to the latter stages, get to that stage where, you know, once you're in the final, it is almost anybody's game, and it's almost essentially 50-50 because it's a cup final and it just comes down to what happens on the day. But I do think Liverpool's style of play in general, it's not just the fabric of the club, it's not just our affiliation with Europe, but the way we play under Jurgen Klopp with the counter-pressing, with the intensity that we play in those kind of European night games, we're perfectly suited to knockout stage football on this level. We're perfectly suited to playing the big teams, and that's why we blew away teams at Anfield last season. It's why we battered Porto, it's why we put 3 past Man City, and it's why we put 5 past Roma in the space of about half an hour in the semi-finals. Liverpool are perfectly kitted out to win this, and I think that means that we are a definite favourite for this tournament. You know, we're not the favourite, we're not the team that everyone's going into and saying they're the ones who will probably win it, but we're a team that everyone is looking at and thinking they have definitely got a fair shot at winning the Champions League this season. And I also think what happened in the final last season, you know, those players are going to look at that and think we deserve to win the Champions League last season. With all that happened in Kiev, with how fate essentially conspired against us, with so much luck going against us and going in the way of Real Madrid, they're looking at that and thinking we deserve to win the trophy, so they will be fired up to try and replicate what they did last season. However, with the Champions League, you can never be sure, you know. You can only look at Pep Guardiola, who is a fantastic manager, you know, one of the best managers in the world. He has not even got to the final in the last 7 years of the Champions League. And you only have to look at that to realise that this is incredibly difficult competition to win, because at the end of the day, knockout football is incredibly unpredictable. You know, you can get a bad draw, you can get bad refereeing decisions, and it only takes a couple of those to go against you and you could be out in the round of 16. You know, it's an incredibly difficult competition, even when the luck goes with you sometimes, to get to the very latter stages. And at the end of the day, even though we did do well last season, and that's always got to be taken into account, and the fact that we showed that knockout European football suits us almost perfectly, there's always the element of unpredictability in Europe. You know, it's entirely possible that we could get Bayern Munich or Barcelona or Juve, and as impressive as we were against the big teams last season in Europe, we haven't played those teams yet. You know, it's entirely possible that Bayern could be our kryptonite, Barcelona could be our bogey team. Any of these teams could just conspire perfectly to knock us out on their day. So the verdict, should we be expecting Liverpool to win the Champions League? If you ask me, no, because like I said, it's really, really difficult. But I think what would represent success in this competition is probably a run to at least the semi-finals, because like I said, when you get to that stage, when you get to the latter stages of European competition, it does become anyone's game. You know, once it gets down to 4 teams left in there, Liverpool have got every possible chance to win it. And I think when you look at it and when you look at our side, this is certainly a trophy that Liverpool have got a strong chance of winning this season. And of course, if we did win the Champions League, that would undeniably mean success for Jurgen Klopp and his boys. So now we come to the less exciting of the 2 trophies on offer this season. It is the 2 domestic cups, the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. And the really interesting question about these 2 is not whether or not Liverpool can win them, but whether or not Liverpool should. You know, there's a huge argument to be had over whether we should actually go for these tournaments or not, because if you ask me, they're essentially an easy win. And, you know, nothing's easy in football, don't get me wrong on that. But when you look at something like the League Cup especially, I think if you field a full-strength team in all of your games, you almost guarantee your place in a semi-final already, because so many of the other big teams around, and, you know, it's possible that this could be different with Man City being so good this season. A lot of the big teams could look to the domestic cups as an alternate route to try and get silverware and to try and achieve success this season. But by and large, most teams that are big, the teams that can challenge us and go toe-to-toe with us, will often tend to field weakened teams here. And it's something that Jose Mourinho has done in the past. He's famed for it, of fielding a full-strength team in the League Cup, and that already gets you to the latter stages. So by the time you get to the semi-finals, normally you're either playing, you know, a lower league, a lower Premier League side, or even a Championship team or something like that. And of course, once you get to the final, it gets a little bit 50-50. And it's similar with the FA Cup, not quite the same, because it has a little bit more history and heritage and prestige and stuff like that. But it is a similar scenario where if you play your best players, your absolute best 11, then you will progress fairly easily, you know, much easier than it is to get to the last stages of the Champions League and anything like that. And I just think that, you know, Liverpool, even with a second string, could probably make a lot of progression. You know, as I mentioned earlier on in this video, our squad depth is better than it ever has been. And if you took everyone that you would consider to be in our absolute best starting 11 and took them out and only played the players who aren't in that 11, you could probably field a pretty strong team that could probably still get to the latter stages of the competitions. But the issue for me, like I said, is whether or not we should even bother doing that, because I think winning these cups does not necessarily guarantee a successful season. And like I said, it's often used by big managers and by big teams to paper over the cracks of what has actually been a disappointing season. You know, I mentioned Jose Mourinho trying to get hold of domestic cups in the past just to say that he's got some sort of silverware. And I mean, I mentioned the FA Cup being better than the Carabao Cup supposedly, but you only have to look at the last 5 winners of that tournament to realise that actually it's not that great, and it doesn't really mean success at all. You know, Chelsea won it last season, but finished 5th and sacked their manager, and I think it's fair to say had a pretty woeful season, all things considered. A couple of years before that, Man U won it, but they also finished 5th, also sacked their manager, and also had a horrible season. And in the other 3 years, it was won by Arsenal. And yeah, you know, it took them a little bit of a little while longer. They went round the houses a bit more, but they eventually ended up finishing an Europa League spot and sacking their manager as well. So it's hardly like this competition breeds success. It hardly means that winning the FA Cup means that you've had a good season. And I just think, you know, success in these tournaments is quite simply not as black and white. And that's where that's the crux of this whole argument about trophies for me. You know, I don't think that saying If Liverpool win a trophy, it's success. If they don't win a trophy, it's failure. Because when you look at the teams that have won these tournaments in the past, it's clear that silverware does not equate to success on and off the field. And I mean, when I think about whether or not Liverpool should even go for these cups, I have a feeling that Jurgen Klopp won't actually have much of an interest in them at all. You know, he is interested in progressing the club long term. He's not interested in getting vanity silverware. He's not like Mourinho, who wants to be able to say, I'm a winner, who wants to be able to rebuff questions from the press about his future by saying, look at all the trophies I've won. He is more interested in progressing the club long term and setting them up for long-term success for years and even decades to come. And just winning silverware is not key to that. It's much more about taking the club in the right direction. And I mean, when I think about what he's going to do in the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup, I think maybe he goes to the FA Cup because it's something we've never really seen a run in under Jurgen Klopp. He's never taken us, I think, past the 4th round stage in that tournament. So he might go for that. But I think certainly in the Carabao Cup, we've got to the semi-finals twice under Jurgen Klopp. We haven't won it either time. One of those we even got to the final. And I think Klopp's looked at how that's affected his squad, how a League Cup semi-final has affected the schedule and worn players out essentially, and thought, actually, I'm not sure I can even be bothered with that. I think last season, he definitely prioritised European competition and finishing in the top 4. And at the end of the day, it worked out well for us because we finished in the top 4 and we got to the Champions League final. So if I'm honest, success in those tournaments, not entirely black and white. So I'd love to win them. But if we don't win them, and even if we go out in the first round of both of them, I'm not entirely fussed. So the overall verdict, do Liverpool have to win a trophy? At the end of the day, they are important. You know, silverware is what you get remembered by. And I would, of course, love to see Liverpool lift a trophy, but they're not the be-all and end-all. And I think the opinions of those that matter, and that's crucial here, because when people argue about trophies, they say Jurgen Klopp will be judged on whether or not he wins a trophy. But I think the opinions of those that matter, and that's fans of the club and the staff within the club, including FSG, you know, the people who are capable of pulling the trigger on Jurgen Klopp and sacking him, their opinions are not affected by just one metric. They're not going to come to the end of the season if Liverpool have mounted a title challenge and got to the final of the Champions League and say, you didn't win a trophy, so let's be honest, Jurgen, you're going out the door. That's not how it's going to end up. So there will be, you know, low quality journalists and of course always fans of rival clubs who will say Klopp's a flop because he didn't win a trophy and he's got final problems and all that kind of thing. But for those who care about the club and from the opinions of those who matter and who actually have an influence on what goes on in Liverpool, winning a trophy is essentially not the be all and end all. And the priority this season, I think, is maintaining an upward trajectory, because that is what we should be doing. You know, we had an incredibly successful end of last season where we made a fantastic European run and did bring up our form in the league above what we have seen it in the past. And we have signed players since then to improve the team and cover up some of the weaknesses we had. So I think we do have to progress. We do have to be better. You know, I'm not going to look at the end of this season and say, if we finish 4th, don't win a cup and get knocked out in like the round of 16 of the Champions League. I'm not going to look at that and say that's a success, because at the end of the day, that's not progress. But I think the priority has to be not winning a trophy, but challenging City in the league and continuing to get to the very latter stages of European competition, because that would represent progress from Liverpool. And at the end of the day, in the current climate, with the project that Jurgen Klopp is trying to put together, progress equals success. So that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, why not give it a like? Let me know if you agree with what I've said or whether you think Liverpool have to win a trophy this season in the comments below as well. Apart from that, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back soon with build-up content for the game against Crystal Palace. Bye for now.